Welcome to the Inspire Health podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Today we have a truly authentic and inspirational human being, Gabriel Giron from Kinetic Effect. If you are in need of some inspiration and motivation to follow your passions in life, then this is the episode for you. From an angry and explosive teen to an award-winning keynote speaker, Gabe has learned that it is how we reflect on our past experiences that defines who we are and how we view the world around us. This highly dynamic keynote speaker and spoken word artist has made a career out of inspiring youth and adults to follow their passions and live life for today. Kinetic Effect combines dynamic spoken word messages with motivational speaking that is described as both life-changing and captivating. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Welcome to the Inspire Health podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Welcome to another episode of the Inspire Health podcast. Today we have Gabriel Giron. He's an award-winning national keynote speaker and poet who has dedicated the last 13 years of his life to philanthropy and the art of writing and performance. Gabriel's the co-founder and executive director of Speak It Forward Incorporated, a nonprofit dedicated to transforming the lives of youth and adults by using spoken word poetry as a vehicle to raise awareness, challenge stereotypes, break down barriers, and instill a sense of empowerment and community. As a former soldier in the U.S. Army and a cancer survivor, Gabriel has learned the power of sharing his story and how words have the ability to connect, transform, and inspire others. Today, Gabriel spends his life traveling, speaking, and performing as one half of the duo known as Kinetic Effect. His purpose and passion in life is to help others realize their true potential and recognize the power of their story and their voice. Gabriel, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. That bio makes me sound amazing. It's great.
So, Gabriel, I was not too familiar with spoken word poetry until I met you and started looking into some of your work and thought, man, what a really cool way to bring messages to kids, and in a way that I think is fairly receptive, at least from what I'd seen through a number of your videos and everything. How did you get into spoken word poetry? I mean, it's not usually the thing you see when you go to university or something as
Yeah.
one of your majors.
So I've always loved writing ever since I was a kid. Actually, my mom still has my first published piece of writing, which was a limerick in the kindergarten newspaper when I was 5. So I've always had a fondness for writing. And in a lot of ways, through some of my past and some of the difficulties that I experienced, which we may get into a little bit later, writing became the one thing that I could trust. I could always write. It was just me and the piece of paper. And I grew up more in a hip hop kind of genre. So I used to write a lot of raps, and then, as you mentioned, I was in the U.S. Army and a cancer survivor. So when I was in the military, I was diagnosed with stage 3B testicular cancer.
Wow.
And it had spread all the way up to my neck when they found it. And so I was stationed in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. And I used to print out my poems, my raps, or my writings. I would do a little bit of prose and short stories and stuff. And I would print them out and I would tape them up on my wall locker in the barracks room where I was at. And so when people would come in, it was a kind of, they would be able to kind of see some of the stuff, and my fellow soldiers would always like stand there and read them or ask me to perform. And a friend of mine was like, man, have you heard of this place called The Myth? and they do this thing called slam poetry. And I was like, no, I don't know what that is. And so he was like, we got to check it out. And so the first time that I went, the setup is there's a national competition for slam poetry where over 72 teams from all across the world come to compete in the US every year. And so venues hold competitions that basically you qualify to compete for nationals. And so a venue will have like an open mic and a slam, like a competition that if they're connected to the national competition scene to qualify, and then they'll have a featured poet, someone that they bring in typically from out of state. And the first time I went, the feature was a world champion female slam poet, and she was incredible.
Awesome.
And I just fell in love with it. I remember specifically, she did this one poem, and it's very performance based. It's not the, sometimes I think when people hear poetry or performance poetry, they think of like a guy in a beret with beard and circle glasses and people snapping and he's smoking a pipe, type of thing. It's very much not that. It's very like interactive. There's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of vulnerability. It's kind of borders on some kind of hip hop style rhythms, because it's free verse. And so she did this piece about her mother, and her mother had passed away. And she was basically, the essence of the poem was, no matter what your relationship with your parents are, be grateful that they're alive, because I don't even get to fight with mine anymore. In a nutshell, right? It was so much more
Right.
complex than that. I kid you not, after her set was over, 90% of the people got on their phone, including myself, and called their mom.
Wow.
Because
That's powerful.
it was that powerful. So it shifted my writing into a different genre. And I never started writing to share with other people. It was really just a way for me to process. So I was writing a lot about my battle with cancer, things that I was going through in the military, things that I was going through. And at the time I was 18, 19, 20, and into 21. So it was just a way for me to process, and I fell in love with it. And so that's why we use it as a tool, really, in our nonprofit.
I love that. And like what you had mentioned when everybody gets on the phone and then starts to phone their mom after hearing that. Like
Yeah.
that's the power of when people pick up on someone being vulnerable and authentic. And to me, that's where so much of this is so transformative, because that's not something that a lot of people feel safe to do. So
Right.
when you're working with kids, how do you start that process? Because and I'm thinking you also work with groups of kids from a lot of varied backgrounds. So you're going to hit
Yeah.
some kids where it's like they're growing up in rough areas where even the
Yeah.
concept of being vulnerable might not be advantageous for them, or their perspective of it seems like a weakness rather than a strength. How do you sort of work with that to kind of show them and teach them where that actually becomes one of their most profound strengths?
Yeah. So I'll get to that in 1 second, but just for your audience awareness. So I co-founded a nonprofit with my performance partner, because I perform and speak with another guy. We perform simultaneously together. And then he was an English teacher for almost 10 years. He was an English teacher for like 8 or 9 years. And he was like that out of the box crazy teacher that everybody wanted to be in his class. He was just amazing at connecting with students. He used humor. He's a little bit aggressive, kind of controversial. He would say things that borderline, like I wouldn't be able to get away with saying some of the things that he does, but he can because it's him.
Yeah.
And so when we started getting some notoriety for performing, we always wanted a way to give back and connect. And so he would work with the kids who could barely, read and write, but also he was so brilliant and so good at what he did that he would work with the IB, the International Baccalaureate, or AP, sometimes it's called advanced placement kids. And so he had this like interesting spectrum of the two sides. And so it was interesting because when we started the nonprofit, that's kind of where we fell into with who we ended up working with, because both of us were really rough, kind of troublemaker youth. And also, then when we went to college, we both somehow figured a way to turn it around and excelled. So we very much mirrored each other. So we work with kids in juvenile detention centers and treatment facilities. So oftentimes in the treatment facilities, they're like last stop before prison kind of treatment centers. Like, this is your final chance to turn it around. And then we also work with like leadership development. So like the kids who are going to go on to the Ivy League schools and be successful, traditional successful,
Yeah.
kind of things. So you're absolutely right. Ironically enough, in both of those spaces, it is often not advantageous to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we really use the performing and writing as a Trojan horse, because we're good at what we do and we're captivating and entertaining. And sorry, it's my dog just sitting next to me, making sure that everything's okay. um, so so what we do is we use the writing as a way to engage the kids, and we'll get in there and we don't tell them that we're going to get them to write about things in their personal life or whatever. We just get in there and entertain them. So we connect with them with humor, we connect with them with out of the box lesson plans and activities to engage them, to get them thinking, to challenge concepts that they've been taught. And then we start talking about our personal stories of transformation, and we get really vulnerable, but we do it in a way that can be both heard, engaging, but not overloading. You know, like sometimes when you talk to people and they're sharing something, it feels like they're dumping on you versus
Mm-hmm.
sharing. We found a way to do it in a way where we can just connect. And so really what we establish in the beginning is laughter, trust, and vulnerability. So we model for them what they're then we're going to ask them to give to us. So we never ask of them anything that we're not willing to do. So it makes it a lot easier. And a lot of that comes from my teaching style. He's just really incredible. So
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when I've watched some of the things, one of the things you guys do really beautifully is incorporate that aspect of humor that gets tied into the entire message that you're doing. And I kind of find
yeah,
even when you kind of bring something really quite raw and authentic and powerful, there's a way that it kind of transitions in and out with humor. And what I love about humor is I find like it is about the easiest way to almost instantly change context around
exactly.
situations. So as soon as you add a bit of humor into something, you know, you make people laugh, all of a sudden their guards come down and they kind of become a little bit more open naturally.
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah, it
Uh,
was
I,
really
I
beautiful to watch.
I love that you picked up on that, because it's something that a lot of people don't catch actually, because we'll actually have people come up to us afterward and be like, "You guys were hilarious. You should be comedians." And my business partner always says, "Well, I can be funny because I'm not expected to. So if I say something that doesn't get humor, I can just move on because what we're actually talking about is serious." So that's what helps us be funny. But we're very intentional about exactly what you just said, which is, to us, humor is the easiest and best way to cut through into vulnerability. It builds trust, right? And you get an immediate auditory response. So I can be saying the most profound, amazing thing in the world to you, but some people are very non-readable. They can be stone-faced. So you have no idea if it's landing, right? Inside, they might
Mhm.
be agreeing with you. They might be with you every step of the way and be saying, "Oh my God, yes, this is incredible. I can't, yes, yes, yes." But you can't read them. On the flip side, people are also very good at, yeah, as I'm sure you run into, at faking understanding social norm. So they
Yeah.
can be nodding and being, you know, but inside they're like, "God, I can't wait until this is over." So with humor, though, you can't really fake that very well, and especially not consistently. So by using humor, it elicits that audience response. And in a way, and I hate the word manipulation because it has such a negative connotation, but for lack of a better word, it helps manipulate the audience, because when you hear other people laughing, it's almost contagious,
For sure.
where you feel like, oh, okay, these guys are funny. They're all right. I trust, which is why we usually start with humor. We make fun of ourselves. We talk about embarrassing things, and it kind of lets everybody let their guard down. Then we're able to talk about some concepts that, we challenge a little bit, some lighter stuff. And then we move into our personal stories. So it's like, after we've gained a little bit of trust, here's something that you wouldn't expect or to know about me. And then that draws an audience in. And then we take them really deep down into some heavy places, and then we bring them back out and bring them up and leave them on a high note. So we've constructed our speaking performances and the poems that we do in a manner to be able to get in, build trust, take them down into a deep level of transformation, where they can learn something or have a switch in their viewpoint, and then bring them out. And it's a really interesting roller coaster ride. So in our workshops, we can get people to a place where they're comfortable sharing some of the most vulnerable things about their life that they may not have shared with a lot of people in like an hour,
Hmm.
because we've crafted this. Two strangers, they're not coming in for a therapy session. It's not the intention, but we bring them to places so quickly, and we've really studied and learned and watched and analyzed and taken feedback, constructive criticism. We're always trying to grow and learn to a place where that's really the key to the door for us. Is like, if we can get them to laugh a little bit, then we know we can take them where we need to go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's obvious well, I don't know if it's obvious, but it's like you feel like you're a part of that roller coaster ride when you guys are working with an audience. And that was what kind of jumped out with me, was just, it's like you can see where it's like, open the door, bring a little bit, kind of go through, open the door a little more, bring a little bit more information, and you just see the audience kind of just going on that journey with you guys. So yeah. So when
Yeah.
you're
Yeah,
performing,
and I have to say, it's interesting too, because yeah, go ahead.
go ahead, finish your thought there, and then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's so interesting too, because people will often ask us, or see a video or something, and I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people love the concept of being able to put a video out, or a recording of an audio, because there's a refinement to it. And interesting enough for us, we feel like we're so much better live. Like, I've listened to a lot of CDs and music and all that stuff, and then you go to a live show, and sometimes it feels more disconnected. You're like, oh, I like the CD better. For us, we have never received anybody who's like, man, that was better on the video, or better. Like, they're always like, it's so much better live. And I think one of the other things that we do well, and that I think is important for people to realize, is leaving room for spontaneity and connecting in the moment. When you go and just repeat the same thing over and over and over again, first, as an artist, it gets boring. But secondly, for an audience, they can kind of feel that it's like staged. And so one thing that we've learned how to let go of is the show has to go exactly like this. Kirk and I don't even talk about what we're going to say anymore when we go on stage. We know the poems, they're memorized, right? And those things are set in place. We know the concepts we're going to talk about. But we leave a wide open door for audience interaction, whether they're connected through laughing, so that we can shift. And we've been doing this so long that him and I can talk to each other on stage without saying anything. So we know if we're like, okay, we need to skip that next part, or we need to move through this quicker and get to the main crux, or maybe that poem's not going to land because of how we're getting reactions, so that we can be in the moment with the audience.
Yeah. And you can tell, like, when you guys have been working together for a while, that it's pretty smooth. Even like little eye gestures, or even you might
Hmm.
even word something in a joking way, but it's got like another different meaning for you guys as far as the direction you're going to take things or something. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's like to have spontaneity is what I think allows more of that authenticity to come out, because you have to kind of tap into a different level of creativity when you just remain open to downloading some kind of information that needs to be shared at that point in time.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you can still have your sort of rough template on, your message that you want to kind of get across, and here's some different ways, but have a lot of flexibility on how it arrives there.
Absolutely.
When you take people on a journey, when you're doing a spoken word poetry to a large group, is there anything that happens after? Does the transformation happen there during the time, or is there a follow up in some way after for the people to kind of, because I imagine once you do that, there's going to be a certain amount of stuff that's going to shift for people, and then where do they go from there? Where do they kind of take that? Because I imagine you're going to get some people that want to go deeper with you on a more personal level, or what's their next steps when you sort of create some shifts for people that sometimes didn't even know needed to be shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So it really depends on the purpose, which is another thing that we focus on, and I think is really important for anybody who's wanting to be a motivational speaker or a performer, is remembering audience and purpose. It's one of the first things that we teach our youth when we're getting them ready to set out and performing, which is who's the audience that you're speaking in front of, and why are you speaking to them, right? Because a lot of people are like, what I have to share is just amazing and it doesn't really matter who I'm talking to, everyone needs to hear this. And we feel like that sometimes is an okay approach. You might get asked specifically because you're an expert in this field to talk about this thing, but a lot of times for us, it's we shift the way that we tell our story or how we tell our story depending on the audience. So if we're coming out to an event where we're not the main keynote speaker, right? We might be part of their main set, or we might even be the keynote speaker, but we know that the day's been long or heavy. Our shift might be, we need to get these people inspired. We need to get them uplifted. We need to get the energy moving in the audience. And so sometimes things come up for people and they'll come and they'll share them after the performance with us. We always make it a point of habit to show up like an hour at least early to our performances so we can get a feel of the energy in the room and listen to some of the other speakers or some of the other things that are being said at an event, or talk to people if it's just us that's performing, say at a high school, talk to principals, talk to students, so that we can kind of gauge where to go with that. So that's one thing. And then we always stay afterwards because we know things are going to come up. Just we had a performance last week and this kid came up afterwards. It was really incredible. Kind of a good looking guy. You could tell he was, athletic. He had nice clothes on. Looks totally like the kind of kid who you'd think has a easy high school career.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up and he just started crying, like literally just broke down. And I held him. He came up, just grabbed me, and he's probably like 6'1". I'm 5'7". He just grabbed me and bawled in my arms for, and I kid you not, between probably 4 and 5 minutes. It was a really, and hold him in that space. And we stayed after for an hour and talked with him about what was going on in his life. And so some of it is just being able to be in that moment and talk with people when things come up because they really just need to share it. Sometimes you don't have that luxury, or you have, sometimes we're performing in front of audiences that might be 3,000 plus, where you can't talk with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, being able to offer up our emails or social media accounts help, if people are willing to reach out on the good, in the good spaces where they're really not just looking for a momentary blip on the radar, they're looking for some transformational shift. We're doing long-term work. So we're coming in there more than once. Maybe it's a handful of times, or maybe like with our workshops, like once a week. And so in those ways, when things come up, you're able to take them on a case by case basis You're able to really think about them, and we develop our lesson plans around the kids. We don't bring in lesson plans. Again, like we're celebrating our 10th year this year for our nonprofit.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And one of the facilities, one of the long-term juvenile treatment facilities that we've been working at, we've been there for 9 years and up into 2 semesters. We haven't repeated a single semester of identical curriculum in 9 years. And I don't mean that every single lesson plan is new. We have some ones that really work and are very effective that we use as kind of like our foundation, but we allow the students to guide us where we need to go. Sometimes we really want to take them somewhere deep and we realize, man, they just need to let off some steam and have fun. So we'll play a game, turn a lesson plan into a game or vice versa. So kind of to get back to the crux of your question, it's hard because it's such a varying degree of situations that come up. Sometimes you need to just be present in a moment and stay with one person and really give them your time because that's life changing. Sometimes someone just needs to come up and share something, like, because I'm a cancer survivor and my business partner had a really traumatic experience his senior year of high school. 5 of his friends took their lives his senior year of high school. And so we touch on some of these topics from the average kind of mundane, like I had to move around a lot as a kid and my parents got divorced, things that a lot of people experience that can affect us deeply, but are very common to, I had cancer when I was 18, or my friends, I lost hey, like I'm going through this thing and it's really tough and I haven't really been able to talk about it, and be present with them and hear them. And maybe it's just a minute and they just need to say that out loud so that they can start the process. The nice thing is a lot of places that we go to have support. So if we're at a school, they have counselors. If we're at a treatment facility, they usually have therapists or parapro workers with them. When we're in adult facilities, when we're at national conferences or annual conferences, a lot of them usually have some type of support that they can go to. Sometimes they don't. And those are the ones that we really try and give our time to and really kind of stay there and be there with. I hope that answered your question. But
yeah, no, that's good. Well, and I was also thinking, what kind of groups do you find yourself performing to primarily? Or is it a lot of stuff in schools, or is it what are some of the different venues that you tend to move
it's
toward?
a mix. So I would say probably maybe 50 to 60% of the audiences that we perform for are high school and middle school. Because we get so much repeat business in that arena, because the obviously the kids are continuing to change over. And then the other 40% is like college, corporations, foundations, national conferences, annual conferences, event fundraisers, those kind of things. So it varies. When we're in a high school or middle school or college, typically we're the thing that they're bringing in. So it's just us for that hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or however long they have us come in. And so we're able to kind of just do our thing. On the annual conference stuff, national conference stuff, obviously we're one of a handful of speakers. Sometimes we're in the beginning, sometimes in the middle, sometimes we're the keynote, closing it down. For corporations, a lot of times they're bringing us in to give back to their employees or get some, passion or motivation. And so those are like the varying degrees of like, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to focus on? Why are we talking to this crowd, audience, and purpose thing that I was talking about earlier?
Right. That's what I was going to ask. What the motivation was for them to bring you in, like what they were looking to get out of your performance. Do they, when you are talking to someone about coming in to perform, how does that go? What do you kind of explain to them? Do they know the impact that they're looking for?
Most of the time they do. We've been blessed enough in the last, we started Kinetic Effect in 2007. So this is 12 years for us now on the performance side. In the last 8 years, we have not solicited a speaking gig. In other words, we haven't done any promotion. We haven't asked people. We don't have an agent. We're just now starting to do that because we're recognizing that in this digital age, it's just
Mhm.
advantageous to do that. But everybody who's brought us in has really just been by word of mouth or people seeing us. And we've made a career over the last 8 years just on reputation. So that's been really nice. So most of the time, like 95% of the time, they know exactly what they're bringing in because someone has said, these guys are amazing. You have to get them in. And so if it's a school, like I said, we like to ask them, what are the issues that are going on in the school? And it varies from place to place. It varies from rural to urban. It varies to socioeconomic status. Sometimes it's, hey, we're really struggling, especially right now with like bullying is a big issue. Almost all the schools struggle with drugs because, of course, when you're a teenager and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to be, and there's all this pressure on you, escaping is a big thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just challenging the concepts of what it means to be successful or kind or, all those things. So we will kind of pick the brains of the people who are bringing us in. When it's a national conference or an annual conference, we know, like, we've been to a lot of those things. I'm sure you've been to some. Sometimes they can be really boring. Like sometimes they're great, sometimes there's really amazing speakers, but sometimes they're just trying to fill up time.
Yeah.
They've got people who are putting on these 3-day events and they're like, man, we need to have every hour something for them to do with little breaks here and there. And so people are just like exhausted sometimes from going to these things because, I've been to enough, and I know that I'm can be a little bit more critical because I do this for a living. So it's hard for me to watch someone else do what I do. Um, but I've been to enough where it's like, if I see 10 speakers, I'm happy if 2 of them gave me something that I can walk away with. So for us, sometimes when we're there, we're like, we're going to talk about the the tough stuff, right? We want to really reach in and get them, but we definitely focus more on getting the energy back in the room, making them laugh, making them feel like refreshed, get them going for the next session. So it really just varies on where we are and what we're doing to how to really connect.
Yeah. Oh, and it also just like that's what's going to keep them engaged, especially after hearing speaker after speaker. When someone pops up and they're inspiring and humorful, and it's like that's what's going to keep people open and engaged into what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But now, even too, there's, I mean, it's not just about how it makes people feel and whatnot. I mean, this has been studied now too. There's a lot more research kind of showing the beneficial effects of spoken word and the transformational ability that it can have. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially around the youth, that's a really big thing for us. I'll give you a little bit of background in my story just to kind of help understand how it was for us experientially, and then I'll talk about kind of on the research side. So I grew up in New York. I grew up in like a spiritual community, which I loved. It was really great. My parents were studying meditation and yoga, and um, and then when I was 7, my parents started to go through the process of divorce. And when I was 9, we moved from New York to Michigan, which is where I live now. And so from 7 to 10, I went to 4 different schools in 4 years. And from someone who had a really stable, more or less, upbringing, it was really difficult to do all that transitioning and losing friends and making friends and losing friends and being the new kid. And then I was really close with my dad, and my dad stayed in New York, and my mom moved to Michigan because that's where her family was from. My mom was one of 13 kids in a large Italian family, so she wanted to be closer to her family. And my mom did really the best she could, but she was 41 years old. She had moved to Michigan, so she didn't have a job when she came here. I think she had something like $3,000 in the bank and a 9-year-old kid, and we had to start over. And we had nothing, and we moved into an area that had kind of a higher socioeconomic playing field. So I was, and not very diverse. So I was, you know, half Hispanic, so I'm brown. I'm from New York. I don't have the nice clothes, and I'm the new kid. It was really tough. And I went from somebody who felt like, I was kind of a leader and did things that I kind of loved and was outgoing to turn very introverted, because basically what I was taught was what I was and who I was not accepted. And I don't think I understood that consciously, but on an unconscious level, my survival techniques went: get small, go in, and don't be who you are because you're not accepted. Be someone else. And so I started hanging out with the other outcasts. And by the time I was 13, I got involved in drugs, alcohol, and gangs. By the time I was 14, I started selling drugs. And by the time I was 16, I had people working for me selling drugs. And I wasn't really focused or thinking on how that was going to impact my future. I was focused, because I was in survival mode. I was
Mhm.
focused on the now. What do I need to do now to be able to fit in? What do I need to do now to get money? What do I need to do now to kind of escape from my reality? And so I started doing a lot of those things. My best friend growing up in high school, he kind of introduced me into that life, more or less. And because he wasn't able to shift from that perspective, he's in prison right now. He's serving 18 to 42 years in a level 4 maximum security prison. And I honestly believe that that's where I was headed, because I wasn't really making the best choices for myself. I wasn't living up to the truest potential of who I was. I wasn't really thinking about what my purpose was, or the power of who what was inside me. I was really focusing on just surviving. Now, I was lucky because I had a few things that really changed the way that I looked at life. And as a youth, for some reason, I always had this fascination with what was next. And by that, I mean like the afterlife. What happens when you pass? Well, my grandfather passed away going into my senior year of high school. And he was just this amazing person. And he was successful in the sense that he made a difference in his community, right? He had 13 kids, so he didn't have a lot of money, but he always was able to set a place at the table for someone else if they needed it. He never judged people by the way that they looked or the way that they dressed or any of that. He was also very welcoming. And he really instilled that, and it trickled down through his family. But because I didn't grow up there, and because I came in kind of in that chaos, I lost part of that messaging as I was going through my teenage years. And so at his funeral, my family had, even though I was making a lot of bad choices, I still loved writing, and my family knew that I was a really good writer. They asked me to read something at his funeral. And when I stood in front of the audience, it started to really make me think a lot about, because I saw all these people show up for his funeral, right? And it wasn't like a, hey, we're sorry. It was like, hey, we're here because this guy made a difference, right? In my life, in the community. And I started thinking, like, who would show up if I passed? Who would show up at my funeral, and what would they say? Would anybody have anything good to say about me? And it really started playing into the way that I started looking at the world. And I realized I had to start taking some responsibility for some of the things that happened. Sure, was I in control when I was 7, 8, 9, 10? No. Was I in control of the school that I went to? No. The way that the kids treated me? No. But I was in control of the way that I reacted, the way that I responded, and the steps that I took after that. And so I started to think, like, well, what's my part in all this? And right when I started to change and shift my thinking, because I was like, I don't have money, I don't have the grades, right? I haven't been doing anything or focusing on the things that would propel me in the normal, traditional path of success. Right when I really started asking those questions, I ran into an Army recruiter. And the Army recruiter, I sat down, wasn't even an option for me. Like, I wasn't thinking about this as a good choice at all. But he started talking about the ability to travel, the ability to kind of start over in a basic training, kind of scenario where it was clean slate, the ability to make my own money, the ability to pay into the GI Bill to be able to earn college. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is everything that I've been thinking about in one shot. And so I ended up enlisting in the military about 3 days after I turned 18, and nobody wanted me to go. My mom didn't want me to go. My dad didn't want me to go. Like, my friends thought I was crazy. But I trusted myself enough, and I went, there's something here, like, I have to do this. I didn't want my mom to take care of me anymore. I wanted to really kind of grow and change. And 7 months into my enlistment, I got diagnosed with cancer. They covered over the next, I think I was at Walter Reed from March of 2001 to December of 2003. And my last surgery was in February of 2002. So for those 2+ years that I was there, they covered over $500,000 worth of medical bills, I would estimate.
Oh.
Which is insane, right? My family never would have been able to afford that. And I would have been in college at the time, so it would have totally derailed anything that I was doing. And it totally restructured the way that I started viewing life, which was what's really important. And I thought about when my grandfather passed, no one talked about his money. No one talked about the things that he had. They all talked about how he made a difference and how he made an impact. And my mom handed me this book after, I think it was after one of my first surgeries. I had gone through all the chemo. I had 4 major surgeries, 4 cycles of chemo, dozens of minor procedures. Like, 2 of the surgeries left me with these huge scars on my body. Well, all 4 of them did, but 2 with like really, really big surgery scars. One where they split me from my sternum down below my belly button. They had to cut my abs in half and take out all my lymph nodes because I had a 14 by 6 centimeter mass of cancer in my abdomen. And the other where they split me from the bottom of my neck down to that same spot in my sternum, because the cancer had moved behind my lungs and into my neck, and they had found a spot on my thymus gland. So they cracked my chest plate open and took out my thymus gland. So I was going through these really traumatic physical and somatic experiences, as well as the chemo and all the emotional baggage that came with, facing your own mortality as an 18-year-old. And my mom handed me this book by Pema Chodron called When Things Fall Apart.
Yeah.
And I loved reading when I was a kid, but I didn't really do it much when I was a teenager anymore. And so it was the first book that I really picked up as a young adult. And it was like this glue that started putting my life back together. And I really started looking at the ways that I was doing things and kind of becoming more aware. And I would have these long conversations with my dad and my mom. My dad is just this amazing human being and has really been one of the spiritual guides of my life. And I went, what's important? Like, what's really at the end of the day, what's important? If I die tomorrow, or if cancer comes back, what are the things that I really value? And to me, they were doing things that I care about, doing things that I love. They were being around friends and family. They were creating community. They were leaving an impact, leaving somehow it better than when I arrived. And so when I got out of the military and everyone was like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? What are you going to go to school for? Even though I never saw writing as a successful monetary path, I went, I'm going to go to school for writing because that's what I love. And I know that tomorrow's not guaranteed anymore. And I'm not going to live my life for what someone else tells me that I need to do anymore. I'm going to live my life for me. And I'm going to do things that make me happy so long as they don't hurt anyone else in the process. And so as that part of me started to evolve, I realized the level that writing played into all this. It was really therapeutic for me. I started sharing some of my experiences of going through the cancer with people, which was never my intention. And people started going, oh my God, you need to perform, hence the slam and the spoken word, and my friend taking me down there because he heard what I was writing and was like, you need to get involved with this. When I got home and went to school and college, people started asking me to come out and speak at Relay for Life events. And that's actually how I started getting into speaking. Was I then became like the person to have come out and speak at these Relay for Life events for the National Cancer Society. because I was able to tell my story in a way that was powerful and impactful, and really showed that even though it's a hard thing to go through, it changed my life in a positive, that you can be in these really difficult spaces and find these amazing lessons from all this stuff. And so as we transitioned this work from performing into the nonprofit sector, and now I'll kind of circle back to your question, we knew experientially the power that writing has, the transformative power. And I knew that when I shared my story on stage, the more I shared it, the more I became comfortable with the difficulties that I went through, and the more I was letting go of some of the trauma that I experienced and taking the power from what happened back to me.
Yeah.
What I didn't know was that the research was backing this up. And so after I graduated from college and we were doing this for a little while, I went back and started working on my master's degree. And I went for communications and public administration, which was basically like their way of combining two things that they had to be for the nonprofit world. So I was learning a lot of things about how to run a nonprofit and how to be effective through these two kind of paths, which was kind of like their way of saying, like, we don't have a nonprofit degree, but if you go down these paths, you'll have everything you need in order to be successful. And so I was in these communications class where they were talking about research, and I ended up having to read this case study about people who were diagnosed with AIDS, who had contracted AIDS, and they were talking about how difficult it was for people to be able to share the fact that they had AIDS. Now, this was in the early 2000s, right? So there was still a lot more stigma around it. Mm. And they were talking about how when people were able to actually tell the people who were close to them, or even strangers in a group therapy circle, about the situation, they were able to start to change the their own personal identity. In other words, when they were able to speak it out loud and not receive a harsh criticism in return, mm-hmm. it started to change the way they viewed themselves. And when I read that, I went, I already knew that. Like, I didn't know it, but I knew it. I knew that's what was happening when I was doing it. And I went, oh my God, they have research on this. The studies are coming out. And then the article went on to talk about what happens when they're able to get into these groups. And so when they're able to get into these groups and share it and they receive a positive reaction, it can also start to change their social identity. In other words, the way that they see themselves within community. And I went, I'm getting the data now. I'm getting the research behind what we're doing and why it's effective. Because what we do with these kids when we get them to write is, at first it's just with us. At first it's just with the paper, so they're seeing themselves. Then we do an within the facility performance. So they're sharing with their peers, they're sharing with staff, administration, maybe their PO officer comes in, or if it's in a school, maybe their parents are allowed to come in and watch these, in-house performances. And it's very emotional. And we create this really safe environments for the kids to share. And then what we do is we take the best students that we work with, and every May we have this thing called our celebration of success. And we get about 500 to 800 people to come out from the community. It's a free event. And we bring the best students, so say maybe 8 to 10 kids out of the hundreds that we work with. We put them on stage, we perform, we MC the whole event, but we make it all about them. And so each one of those kids gets a chance to stand on stage, talk about why they're there, and then share their performance. Whether it's spoken word, rap, song, however they want to express themselves is okay. And they receive these standing ovations from hundreds of people. And you can literally see the power and the impact that it has on these kids and even adults. So sometimes we have adults that are in our workshops and will come out and perform. And so it's amazing to see when you trust yourself and you know that what you're doing has validity, right? Not like the ego, like I'm amazing, I know what I'm doing, but really like that I know what I'm doing is right. I know what it's working. and stay on that path. It was amazing how I found our way to numerous studies that started backing this stuff up. And then you have people like, billionaires like Mark Cuban or Richard Branson or Warren Buffett starting to say things like soft skills are the biggest way to increase your own personal value, right? And what are we teaching them? Really, we're saying we're teaching them writing and performance, but it's a Trojan horse to teach them self-awareness, self-confidence, verbal skills, literacy skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're giving them these soft skills that they can then go use anywhere, where they're like, people will be like, well, you're teaching them poetry. Like, what's that going to do? You're teaching them how to perform on stage. And I'm like, don't we have conversations with people every day? We're teaching them communication skills. Don't you have to go in for a job interview and talk to people? Don't you have to work with people? Like, don't you have to write emails and craft all this stuff? They see it in such a limited box, which is how we present it to be the Trojan horse. But when you really step back and look at what we're doing, it's this huge complex thing that we're giving them these soft skills. We're giving them these gifts, this self perspective that then they have to use, right? It can't just be us, but then they can use to go further on and be able to recreate, kind of talk about their experiences, change other people's lives, or take back the power from the trauma that they had and make a shift.
Yeah. And I feel like that's actually a really significant world shift that's starting to go on right now. There's this movement from kind of almost, it feels to me like there's this movement from the almost solar plexus kind of power center into more of the heart center.
Yeah.
And when I see work like that happening, what you see, and when I hear it and when I watch it, that's what gives me goosebumps around it. And it's like you can tell when that heart just kind of opens, and it goes back to how important it is to be vulnerable and authentic, but how it is so essential to have a safe place that allows that to naturally come up. And that gives people the courage to be able to kind of express it in their own way.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I implore everybody to go and check out. We'll put all your information at the end so people can check it out. But it's like, it really is an experience to watch it take place. And when you watch the different, I mean, every once in a while you can actually see the participants there, and you can see it in their face when things kind of shift. But it's when the way you describe that, it definitely, the soft skills, this is a transition that is needing to happen in the world right now, and it is shifting. And whenever you go through this shift, there's always that transition period where you get certain aspects where they don't want it and other people where they know it's, but it's eventually that's what's going to start to happen. And you look at the world leaders that are making a big difference, like you're talking about with some of these people. I mean, they're big game changers in the world, and they're the ones telling you soft skills are where it's at. That's what really creates that infrastructure and that foundation to then have all the other pieces fall in place.
Oh my God, especially right now where we're,
Yeah.
we're in a world where you have to be able to use technology, right? I mean, it's just almost inevitable. Even if you're in that world where we met in the, the the yoga or the getting more into your personal self, right? Like where you want to kind of reconnect with yourself and disconnect with that stuff. People like the Anadea, she has to be able to present online,
Mhm.
to draw people in, right? So I get that. But the more that takes place, the less people are learning how to communicate honestly, openly, with vulnerability, you know. And so it's exactly what you said is dead on. It's like more and more of these skills are going to be fewer and far between, where if you learn how to do that stuff and master it with any kind of skill or passion that you have, you're really going to stand out from a crowd.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, Gabriel, you had mentioned that you might be able to put together a little bit of a performance for our audience here. So,
Yeah,
if
sure.
you've got something, you're still up for that. I would be honored to hear some
Absolutely.
poetry.
Absolutely. So one of the other big things that I think is really important is this idea of really following your own passion, following your own path, right? And a lot of times when we talk about that in schools or or even in the corporate world, there's a big risk that's involved in that, right? Like, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this? I have whatever it is. I have student debt loan, or if they're in high school, you know, I have this pressure from my parents to do this thing to make money to survive, right? All those pressures come typically from a place of love, because they don't want to see their kids suffer or struggle, but they're often misguided. Or if you're an adult, you might be married and have a partner who's dependent on part of your income, or you might have kids. You know, oh my God, I have this other human life that I'm responsible for. How can I take these risks to do these things? And for me, at the end of the day, I understand that sometimes people have to do what they have to do, right? That's just part of the nature of the world. But I encourage more and more people to be willing to take these risks, because even if you don't succeed in what you set out to attain, if you're being present with the journey, you learn. And so, especially with the youth, I feel like they have so much potential to be so many different things. And we're moving into this world where so many things are becoming automated and full of technology. And so, for me, I'm like, I watched my mom start over at 41. And it's always been this really like underlying motivating factor for me that, like, I'm going to take so many risks because I know you can start over. I know that at some point something falls apart, and you just have to be able to do whatever you need to do to survive. So if I need to go into that space where I'm following the path, right, automation or computers, I'll do that if I have to in the future to survive. But I want to be able to take that risk on myself. Why do I want to take a risk on someone else's dream when I'd be so much more apt to bet on myself because I believe in myself? And so for me, a lot of what we do takes risks. Like, my business partner left his job as an English teacher when we were making literally $0. He had a newborn son. He left his job, so he turned down a steady paycheck, health insurance, like security, um, to do this. And I think I saw I was going through some files, and I found like our old tax return from like the second year we we're in business, and we each filed like negative $1,000 or something on our tax return, and saying, you know, it's like, but we believed in what we were doing. And because we were so passionate and we stayed to our goals, we stayed to our focus, we didn't give up on ourselves, we made it. And so I say all that because from all the conferences that we've been at, especially around leadership, a lot of people are really talking about this concept of being okay with making mistakes, being okay to fail, because we're living right now in a society where it's like, you say one wrong thing, you do one wrong thing, it gets caught on video or it gets put online, and your whole career goes away. And we really need to move away from this idea that we have to be perfect, because perfect is the enemy of greatness, in my opinion. If you spend your whole life trying to be perfect and not taking any risks, you're playing it safe. You're not going to be able to find the amazingness that you are, because the amazingness involves the flaws, it involves the mistakes that come into play. So I'm going to I'll perform a piece that I wrote that was really inspired from just being in this field, from listening to experts. And what I was doing is I wrote this piece over the course of 2 years, because really it just kind of started with me jotting down some quotes and some things that I thought were cool. And so some of the lines in here may be familiar to people. There's a line in here from Steve Jobs. There's a line in here from some other wonderful speakers. But I found a way to kind of take all of it and put it into this narrative, put my own words into it and my own experience into it, and really kind of tell the story about the importance of risk taking and the importance of being okay with failing when you're pushing towards your dream, when you're pushing towards your goal. So it's called
Awesome.
Failure is Living. And there is a video of this on our YouTube channel. Kirk and I performed this piece together for a TEDx event in Detroit. So failure is living. If you haven't failed in life, you haven't lived. Because failure tells us that we've taken a risk, that we're still challenging our own limitations. It's only when you cross the boundary of your comfort zone that you begin to open the lid of who you are and rid your life of the box that everyone tells you to think outside of. And history favors the risk takers. Only those who risk going too far can find out how far we can actually go. You'll never read about anyone throughout history who successfully inspired change because they followed the crowd, because they played it safe, because they cared too much about what other people thought of them. Remember that your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. It's only when you jump blindly from your nest that you can experience the act of flying. You just have to be willing to spread your wings and trust that you were meant to soar to heights you never thought possible from the comfort of your fear. Don't allow the things that scare you to keep you grounded. Instead, become like the Wright brothers after their first crash and be willing to collide into the dirt, to turn the toughest moments of your life into the burst of wind you need to get you airborne so that one day you can see what the bottom looks like from the clouds. And know that just because your eyes can't see past the horizon, it doesn't mean that your world ends at the sunset. They won't teach you this in school. You can't sign up for Failure 101, only audit and observe. So when you graduate, you can navigate the real world, the place where 99% of the things you will experience aren't taught, the place where you will find that the rules and lessons you learned in school don't apply, because in school, the most successful students are the people who make the fewest mistakes. But in life, the most successful professionals are the people who learn to turn mistakes into masterpieces. Artists who have discovered that you can't really figure out how something works until you break it apart. And they'll probably call you crazy for your beliefs. But that's what passion inspires. It inspires the outrageous, the wild, and it turns the impossible into the incredible, like cell phones and spaceships, or sharing parts of yourself with complete strangers, and in the process, becoming friends. That's what happens when you take risks. Sometimes you create amazing things that change the way we live, but often we fail. You have to, because mistakes are part of the learning process. Success and failure, they hold hands. You just have to be willing to jump off the deep end, because pearls don't lie on the seashore. If you want one, you have to dive to the bottom of the ocean and take it. It's only when you dig deep that you can plant the seeds that will grow into something beautiful and will guarantee that when you wake up in the morning, you still feel alive. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter where you finish. What matters most is what you do in between. The steps you took to get to wherever you are now, and the times you got back up after you fell. So dust yourself off. Start chasing your dreams and start living a life that will leave you with a smile on your face and a strong heartbeat in your chest. And start that life today. Start by taking a risk. Start by learning from your failures, and start to appreciate the scars you have that remind you that you lived a life worth living.
Goosebumps, brother. Goosebumps.
Thank you.
Love it. I love it. Gabe, thank you so much for spending your time, for sharing your stories. Where can people learn more about you? Where can they learn more about Kinetic Effects? How can people see some more of your work and next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course we're on the main social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But really, if you want to see some more of the videos, our website, www.kineticaffect with an A, so KINETICAFFECT.com. And then there's a link on our website that says get involved. That'll take you over to our nonprofit webpage. But directly it's speakitforwardinc.org. And that's really the educational arm of what we do. And it's our way to give back and help inspire others and work with people who just need a second chance, a reminder that just because they've been through difficulty or they've made mistakes in their life, they're not their mistake. And they can find a learning lesson in those.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Gabe, thank you so much.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, Reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.